One desk, one lesson, and a girl who won't sit. She's standing close enough to the wall that her shoulders barely touch it. Her jacket stays zipped, tight to her throat. Something shifts underneath. A faint sound escapes, soft, quick, before vanishing again. The room stills. She's seen that look before, years ago, in a child hiding something no one else was meant to see. Wherever you are right now, picture this: the scrape of chairs, the smell of sharpened pencils, the warm gust of autumn air through an open window. Because what happens next will turn an ordinary school morning into a story about promises, winter, and a life saved at the very last minute. Where in the world are you hearing this right now? Tell me below. Because what happens next will turn an ordinary school day into a winter story you'll never forget. The bell had rung 4 minutes ago, but the fifth graders in room 12 were still settling like leaves, trying to decide where to land. Miss Hale felt the chalk dust in the air sift to the back of her throat as she wrote metaphor versus simile in a slant that always looked more confident than she felt. The radiator beneath the windows hissed and clicked like a thing rehearsing a secret. Outside, the pale November sun stroked the schoolyard, and the smell of wet wool and pencil shavings and someone's orange peel made a little weather inside the classroom. Sneakers squeaked. Backpack zippers sang, chairs scraped. "Eyes up," Miss Hale said, breathing through the noise the way a swimmer breathes through chop. Her attention snagged on the back row, where Lena Alvarez stood with her backpack still on, her jacket zipped up to her chin. Lena should have been small amidst the tall backs and bouncing knees, but somehow she took up more space because she refused to sit. She was usually a quick sitter. She liked rules, the fairness of them, the tidy rightness of a job well done, so the refusal sent a soft pinprick of caution along Miss Hale's wrists. "Take your seat, please," she said, matching the tone to honey. Lena didn't move. She hugged her middle with both arms as if she were holding a pillow that no one else could see. And under the jacket, which was one of those shiny puffers with a quilted sheen, something made the fabric bulge more on one side, like a bundle shifted out of true. Not heavy enough to sag the hem, but enough to make a silhouette where there should be a flat plane of child. The room had a temperature, bodies, breath, the radiator's insistence, and the noises braided into a rope tugging at Miss Hale's attention. Someone's eraser skittered to the floor like a beetle. A boy in the front row, Devon, tapped his pencil in a syncopated rhythm that sounded like a heart miscounting. A breeze creeped through the old metal windows and carried the sugar glue smell of the kindergarten art room down the hall. Construction paper, liquid paste, crayons warmed by small hands. Miss Hale could feel the grit of dry erase dust in the crinkled web between her thumb and forefinger, could taste the faint metallic of the radiator steam, could hear the squeal of chair legs that every custodian warned about and every child made anyway. And then a new sound braided into the rope of sound. Thin, uncertain, high. Not quite a whistle, not quite a squeak. A breath, a chirp? It seemed to come from Lena's direction, and it lasted the length of one heartbeat and tucked itself away. Miss Hale turned because the whole room seemed to turn, even if only with their ears. She caught Lena's eyes and saw a look she recognized before she had a name for it. A bright, stubborn fear that was trying to be brave. A look that says, "I'm making a choice, and I need you to let me." Miss Hale's own heart gave a small knock on her sternum, as if to ask permission to speed up. The bulge under the jacket shifted, and the zipper flashed in a jitter of ceiling light. A rustle mouse under paper, a bird trapped in a box, and then stillness again, as though the jacket had only remembered it was fabric. "Is everything okay?" she asked, crossing the room with that slow, non-threatening pace teachers practice the way surgeons practice washing their hands. She moved past the map of the United States that was peeling at Florida, past the book bin, where the sniff of paper met the ghost of a child's spilled grape juice, past the science corner where the class plant named Fern Leaf had recently died and not yet been replaced. The children's attention came like a wave parting, eyes pivoting, lips slightly open, whispers pressing together like beads. By the time Miss Hale reached the back row, Lena had pressed herself against the cinder-block wall, as if the paint could become a second jacket. The bulge shifted again, just enough to announce itself, and the thin not-quite whistle returned, smaller this time, as if swallowing itself back. She crouched to meet Lena's gaze. "You usually like the front of your notebook to be neat," she said softly, because this was a detail she knew about Lena, a tiny bridge. Standing makes the handwriting wobble. A small smile coaxing, "What's going on?" And because she had to, because it was a classroom, and there were rules about jackets and backpacks, and all the quiet things that keep children safe when adults aren't looking, she said, "I'm going to help you take your jacket off so you can sit comfortably." Her hand lifted toward the zipper, stopping a respectful inch away. The class had fallen into that strange silence that is not silence at all, just the intake of 100 questions. On the metal bookshelf, the class pet fish, actually a snail in a jar because the fish had died, pressed its slow mouth to the glass. The jacket's zipper teeth gleamed. Miss Hale's fingers hovered over them, feeling a warmth radiating through the nylon as if there were a small sun inside. She touched the cold tab of the zipper, and at that exact second, the bulge twitched, and some tiny sound like a puff of air that had been held too long, escaped from under the jacket. 3 rows back, Devon's pencil stopped tapping. In the second row, twins Mia and Hannah squeezed each other's hands so hard the knuckles whitened. The room held itself like a breath. "I can't sit," Lena whispered barely, eyes fixed on the shadowy V where jacket met chin. "Please." A whisper ran down the desks like wind in wheat, the kind that blooms rumors on the stalk. Miss Hale didn't lean on the whispers. She relied on noticing. There was a sheen on Lena's forehead that wasn't the room's warmth alone. Her mouth had that tightness children get when they're tired of not being believed. The bulge under the jacket wasn't hard. It didn't pull the jacket into a single sharp angle, the way a contraband phone might, or a heavy book. It breathed if breathing could be a verb for a thing that sometimes was motion, and sometimes was only the suggestion of it. And the sound, it had not been a squeak of metal or the cry of a walkie-talkie. It had been organic. It had been a small thing's courage. "I just want to see that you're okay," Miss Hale said, and she put her thumb and finger on the zipper, as if it were a delicate cord she meant to pluck. The classroom, built a century ago to hold the voices of immigrant children, who would grow into parents and grandparents who remembered the way chalk felt under the nail, held its age and its duty, and the radiator sighed. In the hallway, a locker door somewhere slammed with a hollow thunder. The sky outside was the color of the inside of a pearl, bright but not warm. The clock ticked. In the center of that steady, ordinary tide was this small island of a child, and a jacket that had made itself into an ocean. The zipper's tab was cold and a little sticky with old stick-tack from a previous life. Miss Hale's fingers tightened. "Don't," Lena breathed, sharp enough to cut, and the bulge twitched again as if in agreement. "Let's step into the hallway," Miss Hale said gently, and she stood ignoring the sympathetic ooh that rose like steam from the desks. She held out a hand that was a suggestion, not a trap. Every 3 or 4 heartbeats, the room coughed up a new detail, and Miss Hale collected them the way she collected orphaned paperclips, to be useful later. As they crossed the room, chair legs groaned, and a boy named Keon raised his hand without waiting to be called and said loudly, "Is she hiding a drone?" The class giggled, and the word drone hung in the air like a neon sign, too shiny wrong. Near the door, the autumn air slipped under the gap, so the floor smelled faintly of leaves, and someone's deodorant gave the air a chalky lavender. The hallway beyond held the polished linoleum shine of 1,000 footsteps. From the library, a cart rolled, wheels squeaking, a librarian humming a bar of something old. Ms. Hale had the peculiar sensation of stepping into a photograph and realizing it was a short film. They were almost at the door when the jacket moved decisively, a sliding rearrangement not unlike the way a backpack settles around a lunchbox. The zipper teeth kissed and released, and a sound undeniable this time, alive, pleading, the smallest version of a cry, slipped out into the room. and hit the class like a secret slipping through cupped hands. Heads jerked up. Someone whispered, "Is that?" No one finished. Miss Hale felt the backs of her knees go weak with the suddenness of nerves she hadn't known. She'd been keeping calm. 1,000 options flickered like cards fanned by a magician. Emergency, forbidden, fragile, dangerous, harmless, ridiculous. She kept her face, the steady face. She kept her voice, the steady voice. "Lena," she said, warmly but with steel underneath as fine as piano wire, "step into the hall with me." The girl's eyes flicked to the windows and back, calculating, choosing. She moved. At the threshold, with the room exhaling behind them, and the hallway, a tunnel of echoes in front. Miss Hale looked down at the small metal tooth of the zipper again. She could imagine 100 stories anchored there. She knew, in the way dogs know storms, that the next motion would tilt the day toward some exactness. Her hand rose. She curled her fingers around the tab. She began to lift it, and the bulge under the jacket pushed back against her palm. 10 minutes earlier, Miss Hale had told herself to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, counting to 4 because she'd read somewhere that rhythms rescue you. She had been wiping yesterday's objectives from the board, find the theme, support with 2 quotes. The squeak of the marker trailed her sentences like tired geese. The kids had been trickling in, damp cuffs, chatter clinging to them. That particular Monday stutter where everyone is a little feral from the weekend. She had looked out at the crayon-bright bulletin board of falling leaves, labeled with students' names, and felt the smallest tug of a memory she tried not to feed. A child from another year, another November, who had come to school with long sleeves and a gaze that skittered. Miss Hale had missed something then. She'd missed something in a way that made the child's mother say later, "I thought you would notice," and that sentence had folded itself into a permanent page in Miss Hale's internal book. It turned out noticing is heavy when you carry it forward. She had lined up her dry erase markers by color, the way she always did when she was telling herself she was in control. Black, blue, green, red, like flag stripes. The radiator had rallied its morning racket. Across the hall, Mrs. Nguyen was adding the day's vocabulary, her neat lowercase marching in a disciplined line, the scent of her peppermint tea like a bright flag against the heavier smells. Ms. Hale had smoothed the front of her sweater and thought about the phone call from her father last night. The news that the test results were fine. "Honey, it's all fine," in the voice that had taught her divergent fractions and how to drive, a voice that was always a little rough with reassurance. He had saved the voicemail, he said, like he saved everything, in shoeboxes and folders labeled with the exact month and year, and a few words that never revealed the heart of what was inside. She had smiled so the thought would slide through her and not snag. She'd noticed a minute later that she was noticing too much. The backpack hung from one hook heavier than the others. The room had a faint chemical tang from the custodial cleaner that hadn't entirely evaporated. The whiteboard's reflection showed her own shoulders narrower than in last year's reflection. Stress had carved her in small ways she'd barely admitted to. Into that overbright noticing walked the morning's puzzle. Lena wearing her jacket and carrying her silence. Now in the hall alcove where the fire extinguisher lived in its glass front box like a museum exhibit, Miss Hale kept her posture soft. The kind of soft that says, "I am not a wall you'll crash into." "It's warm in there, yes?" she asked, trying to name a neutral shared truth. Names could be ropes. You tossed someone to help them across a gap. "We can find another way to keep you warm." Lena's eyes were the grey-brown of the sky just before it decides whether to rain or not. "I can't take it off," she said. Not stubborn, just already decided. She shifted, and the jacket shifted. There was a little sound, almost like the hush of a shoelace dragged across tile. Something inside did not want to move. 5 minutes earlier, Miss Hale had been back at her desk, placing the reading logs in separate stacks because order was a life raft. She'd told Devon to stop drumming and Mia, to lend Kian a pencil, and Hannah to please put her gum in the trash, not the underside of the desk. Why was it always the underside? Her mind had done that. Teacher's math of 28 lives plus her own, divided by 48 minutes equals impossible, but she did the work anyway. Through the door's oblong window, she caught a sliver of the parking lot, where a minivan idled because November turned engines into cocoon makers. She had thought about lunch duty and the way the seagulls orbited like tiny judges. She had thought about the principal's new email about safety protocols, the one she skimmed when she was too tired, the one that had a bulleted list that made ordinary days heavier. And now the loudspeaker on the wall crackled with its perennially surprised karaoke machine voice. "Miss Hale, please see me after class," said the principal, Dr. Ortiz, in his slow, careful baritone. The message doubled through the ceiling speaker and the wall speaker, and came out twice, slightly out of sync, like a round. The class said, "Ooh," again, because kids like to be close to the center of anything that might be a story. The sound made Lena's eyes go flick quick to the speaker, and then strangely to the window. She had been glancing at the window since she came in. Miss Hale replayed that detail the way she replayed the kid from last year with the long sleeves. It was a narrow, old-fashioned window, with wire embedded in the glass like a net, set high. The sort of window that let in the idea of sky, but not enough weather to be useful. Why the window? Outside, the first serious promise of snow had not yet materialized, but the air had that metallic expectation that made noses itch. Kids pressed faces to glass for actual snow. They glanced toward it when they wanted a break. But Lena's glances had a different angle, more like she was listening to something that lived outside. Miss Hale came the public address voice again, forgetting that it had already said her name. "Please, after class." The voice made exhale noises as if it were embarrassed to be caught repeating itself. It clicked off and the room's own sounds rushed in to fill the vacuum. In the hallway around the corner, the copy machine whumped and groaned and spit a stack of papers with the smug air of a thing that believed in its own importance. Everything all right. Mrs. Nguyen whispered from her doorway, popping her head in with angelic timing that made her good at teaching in emergencies. Her eyes flicked to Lena and back, taking in more than she let on. "Got it," Miss Hale mouthed, which could mean anything and everything, and eased the door shut. 2 minutes earlier, she had started across the room, thinking of the past like a warning label. She had not noticed then that Lena's jacket zipper tab was bent a little at the tip, or that there was a faint, darker patch near the seam, over her heart, where the jacket had been rubbed and rubbed. She had not yet seen the way Lena winced when her back brushed the cinderblock wall, as if the texture was new, or her skin was newly tender at a specific angle. She had not yet smelled the particular animal warmth that will always make a person want to lower their voice. But she noticed it now, because now was the number that keeps changing. The class settled into tasks, as if this were an ordinary interruption, and not a story growing legs. Pencils rose, paper rustled, calculators made their button moon clicks. "Write 2 comparisons," Miss Hale said, "because assignments continue even when grown-ups are trying to be detectives. 1 metaphor, 1 simile." She put a prompt on the board about weather becoming a person, because weather often did. It had hands and moods. It shook shoulders and quieted rooms. "You have 10 minutes, then we'll share." The sturdiness of a countdown steadied her. She breathed in, 2, 3, 4. Then the office door at the end of the hall opened with a soft suction pop, and a woman stepped in who did not belong in this hour. Parents belonged at beginning and end times, in their coats and their complicated faces. The woman's coat was a thin grey wool over an orange sweater. Her hair pulled back quick and practical, her eyes already looking where she was going. It took a heartbeat for Miss Hale to fit the outside-of-school version of people with the inside-of-school names. Alvarez, she told herself. Rosa, Lena's mother's name, is Rosa. The way the woman walked, purposeful but not rushed, told Miss Hale that she had already decided something and now needed others to hurry up and decide it too. She reached the door just as Miss Hale reached the hall, and for a second they stood in the glossy-walled limbo where the bulletin board about kindness tried to do some heavy lifting. I'm here for her, the woman said, not breathless, but with a breath hovering like a bird. Up close, she smelled faintly of cold air and coffee, and something else, like wool that had been warmed by a heater and cooled by outside again. Her eyes went to Lena and softened and tightened at the same time. Maya, she said, and the word was its own small emergency. We're going to the nurse's office. Miss Hale decided out loud, because decisions made out loud are the kind you can climb like a ladder, just to check. She made it sound like checking was a kind of kindness. She made it sound like the way you check the oven even when the oven isn't on. Assurance. I'm fine, Lena said, the way all not fine people are trained to say by a world that can be impatient with fine details. Her voice trembled like something behind glass that wanted to choose breaking and was choosing holding for now. Her eyes went to the window again, that nail of a window high in the wall. And the quick glance was the sound of a lock clicking inside Miss Hale's mind. Window, jacket, sound. Mother early, Dr. Ortiz calling after class. The braid tightened. Do you have an appointment? Lopez, the attendance clerk, called from down the hall, not unkind, just following script. Her voice bounced a little and made everything sound wider. Rosa lifted her phone as if that were a pass. The screen glowed in her palm with a text bubble Miss Hale couldn't see. My boss, she said, which answered a different question. Her presence here had cost something she was willing to pay. Please, she said. And that was the word that was the bridge, please. As they turned toward the small clinic at the corner where the hall flexed its elbow, Miss Hale caught the jacket's outline against the fluorescent wash of light. The bulge had moved again, settling low now, as if it were hunkering, as if its instincts were to become smaller when the world drew near. The thin, almost whistle came again, a tremble, and Miss Hale saw for the first time that the seam near Lena's left arm had a tiny opening. An accident or an intention? A small thread dangled, and the thread was bright, like something new. The principal's voice pushed against the moment, muffled by two doors and a corner. Miss Hale, when you get a chance, the speakers said, learning to sound patient. The timing made the hair on her arms lift, because timing often did the storytelling for you. Rosa reached for Lena's shoulder, and the girl flinched in that tiny way children do when they expect the touch to pull something away. Rosa stopped, and the stop was tenderness. Sweetheart, Rosa said. And then her face went a shade paler, not with fear but with that particular mother alchemy of fear plus resolve. It's okay. It's not okay, Lena whispered, a shape pressed into the words until it's safe. The nurse's office door was at the end of the hall. White paint chipped at the bottom from 1,000 shoe nudges. The poster outside showed a cartoon cold virus with sad eyes, a ridiculous villain. Inside, the bottle amber light smelled like alcohol swabs and hand sanitizer and a very old jar of tongue depressors. They got there, and Miss Hale exhaled that breath she had been rationing. She would take the universe that allowed her to notice, and also allowed the right person to walk through the door, exactly when the loudspeaker didn't quite know what to say. Relief and dread made a strange stew. She opened the door. And on the threshold, as if the timing had been plotted by a playwright, Lena's mother reached for the zipper. The nurse, Ms. Ramirez, had a desk with a plant that was never watered enough, but every time on the brink of joy. The cot smelled like bleach ghosted under cheap laundry detergent. A box of cartoon bandages made a cheerful army near the thermometer sleeves. On the bulletin board, someone had pinned a flyer about winter coat drives with a picture of a child so generically happy that it made Miss Hale want to find the real children who never get pictured. She was aware of all of it, because her senses were on the setting that comes right before panic and right after focus. Tell me what's going on, Ms. Ramirez said in the voice that had calmed so many fevers. She had already put a hand on the antediluvian baseboard heat, as if to measure the room's baseline warmth. She was no nonsense, her grey bun a blueprint of efficiency. She looked at Lena the way good nurses look, as if the child is a book and you just need to read the right chapter. Rosa stepped ahead, then back, then ahead again, That dance of someone who wants to be both the shield and the messenger. She's fine, she said too quickly, then softer like a rewrite. She will be fine. We should check. Poor favor. In her eyes, Miss Hale saw an entire archive of Tuesday nights and Sunday mornings, of forms filled out and deadlines met, and promises made to little people who asked for things with their eyes, because asking with mouths can be risky. Rosa's fingers, she noticed, were red at the knuckles, the kind of dry that comes from dishwater and hand washing, and maybe cold air on a bus stop. She won't sit, Miss Hale said, because facts are the furniture you can trust in a room. There's something under the jacket. She kept her tone shaped like a neutral bowl. It could hold anything. Take it off, Mija, Rosa said, in that not question that is a test of how ready a child is to relinquish fear, or treasure, or both. The zipper's tab was cold. It had that bent tip that suggested it had been pulled in a hurry by hands that wanted it to do more than it was made for. For a second, Miss Hale felt the scorch of gears in her chest as she imagined all the wrong things that a bulge could be. But even as the dread wrote its list, injury, device, something desperate, the facts lined up like numbers on a whiteboard. The sound had been soft and alive. The bulge had breathed. The seam had a small new hole. She had seen a thread, the smell nearby, a warm animalishness that you only get from certain small mammals, from wool with heart behind it, was stronger in this tiny room, not masked by the big classroom's soup of sense. Whatever it is, Miss Hale said with equal parts hope and warning, we should look. I promised, Lena said. Her voice a small stone dropped into a deep water. To who? Ms. Ramirez asked. Not as a challenge, but because answers sometimes arrive if you ask questions, as if they were keys and not nightsticks. To the wind, Lena said, but even as she said it, she laughed at herself, brief and sad, and shook her head. Two. She glanced at the window. The nurse's office had a real one, lower and wider, that showed the scrap of maple that clung to the playground fence, leftover leaves shaking like coins. To Mama she finished, and the words slid into the room like a tiny boat docking. But also to, her eyes went guilty, someone else. Rosa's mouth compressed into that line that can mean 100 things. Among them, I am scared the world will punish us for being kind. We just need to check, love, she said. Then we will decide. Lena, Miss Ramirez said, her palm turned up. A place to put a confession. If something is hurting you, we'll fix it. If something is not allowed, we'll help you find where it is allowed. If someone told you to keep a secret that makes your body work too hard, then we should look and make the secret smaller. Lena swallowed. Her cheeks went pink the way cheeks do when a child is holding a whole planet of brave. The jacket dipped as she exhaled. A whisper of that now familiar sound rose again, defeated and determined, an instrument warming up without a conductor. She got her fingers on the tab and tugged. It moved a centimeter and stuck. Rosa's hands, work-strong hands, careful, came to help. Miss Hale watched, breath measuring itself again, and was aware of her own heart counting beats she pretended not to care about. Was aware, too, of the past rising up, a winter long ago, a borrowed car, a roadside memory of blue lights and a woman's voice asking if anyone was hurt. A woman with a braid and a fluorescent vest and a calm like a blanket who had leaned into Miss Hale's parents' minivan and said, breathe, just breathe, while a little girl, Ms. Hale, cried because there had been a deer and a skid, and her mother's arm had flung across her chest like a seatbelt made of love. She had not thought of that woman in years. She looked at Rosa now and felt the edge of something familiar, like a word on the tip of the tongue. The zipper gave. The jacket parted a hand's width. From inside, something flashed silver, a gleam like crumpled foil. Miss Hale's throat tightened, mind sprinting toward new fears even as old ones were called off. But then the gleam resolved. The reflective lining of a small pouch, the kind emergency blankets use, tucked between sweatshirt and skin. Taped, sewn, it seemed improvised and devoted. The bulge heaved small. Something moved inside the reflective cradle, a cluster of motion, a knot that was alive enough to rearrange itself under watch. "Cuiso, Ms." Ramirez breathed, Spanish slipping from her like a scarf, then collected herself into English, because school is habit. "What is that?" Lena clutched the edges of her jacket like a curtain that belongs to a stage you're not sure the audience deserves. "If you see it, you'll say no," she whispered. Tears shook at the end of her eyelashes, like raindrops on telephone wires, ready to fall but stubborn. "No one is saying no yet," Miss Hale said, and was struck by the way she meant it. She sounded like she had power she wasn't sure she had. She did not want to stop loving the world by being its hall monitor. "We need to make sure you're safe, and it's safe." She did not know what it was, but the pronoun came easily. Rosa, her hand still on the zipper, leaned in and smelled something, and her face softened. The way faces do when an old memory arrives with a coat and says, "Do you remember me?" She looked at Miss Hale then with a quick, fierce, flinty decision. She began, and then from inside the jacket a sound came, sharper than before, a pleading burr of life. Not a siren, not a machine. A sound that carries right into the center of the chest, because that is where evolution stores its alarms. "Okay," Ms. Ramirez said, moving fast now in that way that is calm wrapped around speed. She pulled a curtain around the cot, a theatrical flourish that turned a doctor's office into a backstage. "Everyone breathe. If there is a living creature, we will be gentle, and we will decide." She glanced toward the intercom phone that connected her to the office, and then away wisely, as if keeping the circle smaller might keep the problem solvable. They eased the jacket wider. The silver glint was indeed a pouch. Homemade from the looks of it, the inside lined with a strip of reflective survival blanket. The outside a knitted sleeve somehow attached with safety pins. There was a small rectangle tucked into a pocket, half exposed, with a red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. A portable hand warmer, the kind sold cheap at the corner store around the holidays. The heat breathed against the cold office air. Inside the little cradle, there was a shape the size of two fists pressed together. Fur, Miss Hale's breath caught. She thought she saw fur edged like smoke. "It was cold," Lena whispered quickly. "Last night it was under the porch." And then the wind. She glanced again at the window, where the maple's last leaves quivered. "I promised I would keep it warm until we found where to take it." "I promised." Rosa closed her eyes for a second, like someone stepping into very cold water or very bright light. When she opened them, she had chosen something. "We were going to stop before school," she said. Quiet and quick, the confession of a person who has been negotiating with a world that does not always treat confessions like proof of goodness. But the shelter opened late. She said. Rosa gestured at her daughter, who still held her jacket like a shield. She said she would not let it be cold again. "Not one more," I told her. She made a small, helpless circle with her hand, the gesture of all parents everywhere who have drawn a boundary that morphs when confronted by a child's impossible mercy. I told her not to tell. Until it was safe. On the word safe, her voice thinned. Miss Hale had a dozen words lined up behind her teeth. Policy and health and animals and school. But the muffled, undeniable sound from the pouch cut through them like a bell. It was not loud, but it threaded every thought to a point. And then, as if to punctuate its existence, a tiny paw, so small it was almost theoretical, pushed outward against the fabric, pressing a perfect minuscule arc that made Miss Hale's skin go electric with tenderness. From the hallway, a new sound muscled in, the walkie-talkie grackle of the school security guard, Carl, whose job it was to be the human fence that troubles had to climb. "Nurse's office," came the radio's robot scratch, unexpectedly close. "Everything good?" Ms. Ramirez looked at the curtain, at the fragile little stage they had built, then at the ceiling where the intercom speaker waited like an ear. She squared her shoulders. "We're fine," she called, and at the same moment, the little thing inside the pouch made a noise that was complicated, like a zipper makes when it's almost closed and the teeth are not quite aligned. Rosa's eyes darted to the nurse. Lena's knuckles whitened. The radio squawked again, closer. Carl must have been making his rounds directly outside. "Copy that," he said, "just checking. We had a note about a situation." The word situation sounded too heavy to be in the same sentence as the soft heat coming from the jacket. But words are blunt tools. Miss Hale felt the moment wobble, fragile as a soap bubble. Above, an institution ready to pop it for health and policy. Below, a tiny weight that taught you how to be exactly this gentle. "Let me see," Ms. Ramirez said. "A compromise, an offering, just a little." She lifted the knitted sleeve a fraction, and from inside the jacket, as if on cue, came an unexpected noise that wasn't quite the soft burr from before. This one had a mechanical edge, a small whir, like the beginning of a cheap fan trying to find its speed, or a plastic motor in a toy waking up. It vibrated through the fabric, subtle and insistent, a sound that would absolutely get a walkie-talkie's attention, or a principal's, or a district policy's. Everyone froze. In the thin second after the whir, the nurse's office multiplied into possibilities. In one version, Ms. Hale pressed the intercom button and said carefully chosen words that grew legs, and walked into a report, and then into a meeting, and then into a rule about what gets to be love in school. In another, Rosa gathered her daughter and a jacket full of warmth and ran before anyone could name the sound. In yet another, the sound attracted attention like a magnet attracts filings, and the circle grew until it cut the child out of her own story. Ms. Hale could feel each future, as if she were standing on 3 different moving sidewalks and could only choose one step. Carl's shadow crossed the frosted glass sliver in the door. He knocked 2 knuckles, gentle but official. "Everything good, nurse?" His voice had the quality of men who learned to be careful large things near small things. He'd been sweet with the fallen first graders, smooth with the middle schoolers testing the edges of sarcasm. He was also the person the school called when there was a report of a knife shaped like a pen, or a pen shaped like a knife. He was everyone's friend until he had to be everyone's guard. Ms. Ramirez moved like a chess player confident about the next 2 moves. She slid the curtain another inch, the universal gesture for we are in the middle of something private. "Give us a few minutes," she called. "We're doing a check." You got it," Carl said, footsteps scuffing away. The radio murmured to its siblings on different hips. "Why is it making that sound?" Miss Hale asked, unable not to be the detector she'd trained herself to be. "It's the warmer," Rosa said quickly, eyes flashing to Miss Hale's, pleading for understanding that would keep from detonating everything. Sometimes it hums a little. The red light pulsed again, like its own slow breathing. The whir built, ebbed, flirted with being loud, and then ducked under audibility. Lena pressed the pouch closer to her, protective not with fear, but with that fierce, practical tenderness that looks like bravery from the outside and feels like panic from the inside. "I told it," she said, as if the pouch contained a pronoun that required grammar. "I told it to be quiet." She lowered her face to the jacket and whispered something Ms. Hale couldn't hear. Rhythmic, the tone of those prayers children invent that work better than the big ones. In the hall, a phone rang at the attendant's desk. Voices braided and unbraided. The bell schedule was a train that would not wait. In 3 minutes, the class would be switching to math. Someone would send a student aide with a note and a restless curiosity. Time itself was attention. They did not have enough of either. "We need to decide," Ms. Ramirez said gently, but with the momentum of a fact beginning to be true. "If there is an animal, we will need to follow procedure, but that procedure can include kindness. I can call a local rescue. I know someone." Her hand fluttered toward her phone. "But we cannot keep it hidden?" She was both offering and warning. "No," Lena blurted, and the word was a damn. Tears arrived not with drama but with efficiency. "You'll take it. You'll put it in a cage. You'll make it wait." She glanced again at the window as if the outside had ears. Last night it was shaking so hard. The wind was, her breath hitched, she swallowed. "I promised I'd keep it warm until it was safe. I promised." Rosa put a hand on her daughter's hair, smoothing the part down like a seam. She had the look mothers get when they are watching their children become the exact kind of person they hoped they would be, and the world presents a bill. "We were going to go," she said to Ms. Ramirez and Miss Hale, continuing the confession that had begun to set her free. "Before school. I had coffee, I had the address. But the bus," she exhaled the city's arithmetic. And then her gaze slid to Miss Hale, then away, shy and pointed. "The way you look at someone you might already know or love. I was late once already last week. I couldn't." The sentence folded like a map. The radio outside burbled again. A brisk set of heels clicked by. The assistant principal, Miss Driscoll, who never met a rule she didn't want to call by its whole name. Miss Hale felt time narrowing, choices calcifying into policy. A memory pressed up through this moment again, stubborn as a spring plant through concrete. The fluorescent vest, the calm braid, the voice that had told a terrified girl to breathe, while glass chimed in the road like winter. "You were on Route 4, that voice had said later, checking on them. Near the veterinary clinic, the deer came from the ditch. She'd been someone official, but more, someone human. Miss Hale had learned the shape of compassion from that night, and had perhaps been searching for it in classrooms ever since. "Lena," Miss Hale said, careful, deliberate, letting the name be a hand. "When you whisper to it, does it calm?" Lena nodded, fiercely, tearfully. "Then let's keep whispering," she said, and sent a look to Ms. Ramirez that said, "Hold the line, please. Another 30 seconds, another breath." The nurse nodded. She had children. She knew how long a 30 seconds can be stretched without breaking. From far down the hall, a door burst open and thudded against a stopper, a sound like a punctuation mark. Voices tumbled. "They said there's no, it's just..." But someone heard, "The school's rumor system was faster than any radio." Miss Hale imagined the version of this story that already lived in someone's text thread. Some girl brought a device. The word device could be anything from a fidget toy to a reason to lock a door. She wanted to reach into the rumor like a magician and pull out a dove. The whir perked again, louder, and Ms. Ramirez's eyes went to the ceiling automatically, counting the seconds until the intercom's tone preceded an announcement. "Okay," she said, decision solidifying. "We unzip, we make a plan, we get this to where it should be. The longer we wait, the bigger the story outside gets. We can keep the circle small if we act now." She was right, and rightness can be a kindness. Lena's hands trembled at the zipper. Rose's hand came to steady. Miss Hale stepped a fraction closer, a tent pole with a face. She could smell it now. The little animal heat, and under that a faint milky savor, and under that something like mud and leaves, the perfume of the beneath of porch. "Wait!" Lena cried suddenly, stiffening. "I promised not to tell until it was safe." Her voice cracked, and the crack was not immaturity but ethics. She shot a look at the window again, as if safety lived out there and had to be invited in like a wary cat. If they take it, she couldn't finish. Her hands went around the bulge, protective, and the bulge pressed back, the universal language of small living things. "What do you mean, until it was safe?" Miss Hale asked, gentle curiosity, turning the sentence into a couch for truth to sit on. "The boys," Lena whispered, eyes wide, "at the bus stop. They tried to look. They laughed. They said they had a BB gun." Her breath misted the air of the nurse's office, even though the room was not cold enough to justify such a thing. Fear has a temperature of its own. "I told them there was nothing. I told them it was my lunch." She laughed, a hiccup. "They don't think girls eat much. They didn't grab." I ran. She looked at her mother, guilty and proud. "I promised Mommy I would not tell anyone until we were inside with a grown-up who would listen. Only then." "I'm listening," Miss Hale said. "I am." "I am," Miss Ramirez said. "I am too." Rosa's face did a surprising, beautiful thing then. It softened into gratitude and hardened into resolve at the same time. "It's time," she said, "but to Lena, not to them. We did our part. We got it warm. We kept it quiet. We will keep it safe. But we have to show them so they can keep helping." The little red light on the warmer beat like a second heart in the room. Outside the door there was a new knock, sharper than Carl's. Nurse Ramirez, Miss Driscoll's voice, in a tone that was all policy and not yet any tenderness. Carl said there is something we should be aware of. The plastic smile under her sentence sounded visible. She would be imagining a device, a risk, a form to fill. She would be imagining being the person who solved a problem rather than the person who kept a promise. Ms. Ramirez shot them a look that said now. The moment took a breath so deep it might have been a miracle. On three, Rosa whispered. Uno. Dos. The zippers slid down with that satisfying sound zippers make when they are doing exactly what they were designed to do. The silver of the pouch opened like a cloud parting. Heat rolled out, tender as someone's breath on a cold day. Fur, yes. Matted grey-brown fur with a salt shaker of pale on the belly. A tiny face, triangular and harsh with hunger and two big eyes that blinked like shutters. Tiny ears flattened and then unfurled. A fragment of a mew, horse from cold Galley. A tiny paw flexed, the claws like the ends of eyelashes, and nestled against the fur, tucked into the knitted sleeve, was a small humming pad. The warmer, explaining the whir that had almost called security like a siren. Miss Hale's hands flew to her mouth, and the same sound the pouch had made came out of her but shaped like joy and alarm and relief. She felt her knees want to give. Not with fear now, but with the sudden overwhelming tenderness that makes a person wish to lie down and let the world be gentle around them. It's a kitten, Lena said with a sob and a smile that made her look like both a child and the person she was going to become. It's just a kitten, she said, as if it were an argument that solved everything. Her tears made her eyes brighter. I found it. Last night it was shaking its mom, she swallowed. I couldn't find the mom, I looked. Rosa put a finger under the kitten's chin like she'd done this before, and the tiny creature impossibly leaned. You're okay, she whispered. You're okay. Before anyone could bask in the delicate victory of revelation, the door handle turned. The curtain riffled with the incoming shift in air. Ms. Driscoll stepped in, eyebrows raised and mouth arranged to form the word situation. Is there, she began, and then she saw the tableau. The child, the mother, the teacher, the nurse, the opened jacket like a nest, the small life at the center, humming against cold. For a fraction of a second, her face did not remember how to be a rule. For that fraction of a second, she became just a person witnessing softness. What, she said, voice transformed by what it had to hold, do we have here? It's Lena began, and then the kitten, horrified and hopeful at the same time, let out a sound like a squeak folding into a mew, folding into a purr that wanted to be born. And on that sound, as if the day wanted one more sting in the tail before it gave itself up to kindness, the fire alarm in the hallway hiccuped. One brief beep, a test, then failed to commit. The room froze. The kitten's paw flexed again. The zipper was down. The truth was out. The camera of the moment cut not to the tiny face, not yet, but to Rosa's face. The way relief and fear and a memory that had been folded for years opened like a letter in her eyes. Later, Miss Hale would try to describe the feeling of the room at that exact second and fail. It was as if the air learned to be softer, as if the fluorescent lights dimmed their meanness, as if every policy in a binder somewhere got a note in the margin that said, in blue ink, but also love. The fire alarm's hiccup died. It had been nothing, a nervous swallow in an old building's throat. Ms. Driscoll's hands, which usually spoke in gestures like hyphens and exclamation points, smoothed into open parentheses. Oh, she said again, this time an exhale. It's a kitten, Lena said, and then, as if this were the moment she had rehearsed for while standing all morning, her words tumbled into clarity. It was under the stairs. At our building last night it was dark and the wind was like... She shivered like needles. I heard it. It was so small and cold. I took it inside. Mommy helped me make the pouch. She looked at her mother with that adoration that makes a body taller. We used Abuela's old scarf because it's the warm kind, and we put in the warmer from Christmas, the kind for pockets. She tapped the small device. It's light steady. We tried to bring it this morning to the shelter on 3rd, but Here her eyes slid apologetically to Miss Driscoll. They were closed. The sign said noon. "You said we could stop after school?" Rosa added, swallowing guilt and truth like a difficult pill. But she smiled at her daughter like a person who knows she is both doomed and blessed. She said not one more minute cold, so she brought it. "I am sorry. I told her not to tell until it was safe." We heard the whir. Miss Ramirez offered, gently holding the moment where every person was turning from problem to solution. "The warmer, the whir," Miss Driscoll repeated, tasting it, letting it refile itself from suspicious to sweet. "Not a device." "Well, I mean, a device. But not that kind of device." The corners of her mouth rearranged, hesitant as if relearning smile. Her heels, which usually made statements on tile, were quiet now, complicit. At the center of their circle, the kitten shifted, a skeletal rearrangement of skin and bones and hope. It pressed its face into the scarf, as if it were pressing itself into a remembered ribcage. The purr found its footing and grew into a thrum that tickled the air. The sound went into Miss Hale's chest as if it had been tuned for her. Something in her unclenched that had been clenched since last winter, since last decade, since the minivan gliding with a scream of brakes, and that braided calm voice saying, "Breathe, may I?" Miss Hale asked, hands half out as if accepting a holy object. Lena nodded solemn. Miss Hale touched the scarf, soft with the oil of 1,000 days of someone's neck, and felt the kitten's heat and tiny rumble. It was so small and so absolutely itself. It made her want to be kind in a way that had muscle and plan. The urge rose in her like a warmed tide. "We can call Willow Street Rescue," she said with the quiet authority of a plan forming. "They have a foster network. They keep neonates warm and bottle-fed." At Miss Driscoll's glance, she added, because she'd learned to speak both heart and policy. "They're licensed." "I know the director," Miss Ramirez said as if the narrative had been waiting for this line. "My cousin volunteers Sundays. I can call now." She moved toward the phone, a gate opening. "We can drive," Miss Hale heard herself say. In that voice people used without thinking in emergencies and kindnesses, the voice that assumed the path appeared if you started walking. "I can take them after school." The "we" arrived uninvited but correct. "I have a place in my car." She pictured the cloth grocery tote in the trunk, the one with a rip at the seam that could be repaired with a few stitches, the way she repaired everything she loved. "I will take her," Rosa said at the same time, soft but firm. "I finish at 1. I can come back. I can take her." "It is our." She searched for the word, found it in her own language first, Nostra Promessa. She looked at Miss Hale, strangely steady. "This is my choice to make." "Of course," Miss Hale said immediately, feeling the rightness of the control traveling back to where it belonged. She had been too ready to step in. The desire to solve could be its own kind of theft. She held the desire in her hand and let it be admired and set down. Of course, the kitten sneezed, that tiny, wet, explosive punctuation that made everyone laugh in the same key, even Miss Driscoll. The laughter did something to the room's molecules. It made them kinder to be inside. "We'll need to fill out an incident report," Miss Driscoll said reflexively, but now the words sounded like tradition instead of threat. "But I think we can phrase it as her face did the math. As a safe transport to a rescue, and a reminder about." She wove the sentence so carefully. "About no animals in school without prior arrangement, with the caveat that emergencies occur." She said caveat like a new friend. In the back of her mind, Miss Hale heard Dr. Ortiz's voice choosing her name out of the intercom earlier and understood suddenly what that had been about. She had promised him at the beginning of the year, after last year with the not-noticed sleeves, that she'd err on the side of stepping in sooner. He called to follow up on Friday's email. He wanted to check that she was doing the noticing she promised. The world sometimes arranges itself so you can keep old promises by making new ones. Rosa turned then, fully to Miss Hale, as if finally placing her like a puzzle piece clicking home. "You," she said, surprised by the discovery her own voice had made before she did. I know you. Miss Hale's mouth went dry with a respectful kind of awe. I? She did too, in a way that was less precise than a name and more accurate than a guess. The fluorescent vest, the road, the woman's braid. Route 4, she said on instinct, like a person picking a note out of the air. Rosa's eyes filled with sudden bright water that made her look younger and older at once. The minivan, she said. Your father? She put a hand to her chest, not for drama but to steady an organ surprised by memory. It was snowing. The deer. You were so small. She smiled, choked. The sound like a silk scarf being pulled through a ring. I was a volunteer MT then. I held your hand, you cried, and then you stopped. She looked around at the room, as if the ceiling and linoleum could appreciate the tasteful embroidery of fate. You asked me if the deer had a mother. She laughed a little, the universe's handwriting suddenly very legible. I said yes. I said the mother was probably in the woods and not mad at you. You believed me. Miss Hale's knees softened again, and she sat in the nurse's chair because some collapses are gratitude. The years stacked themselves like books. You told me to breathe, she said, and discovered that it was not a metaphor. I remembered your voice like a song I couldn't place. She looked at Lena, at the exactness of this child who had promised warmth and kept it. It's you, she said to Rosa, and then to the child, and some of you is her, and some of me is... She waved a hand at the air, unable to name the math. Rosa reached out impulsively and squeezed Miss Hale's hand. The squeeze contained 19 years of cities and apartments and jobs, and a daughter who makes unreasonable promises to the cold. Gracias, she said to the world, which for the moment had arranged itself into 4 women and a kitten, and a policy with an eraser beside it. Then, to Miss Driscoll, she said, a little sheepish, a little proud, I was afraid the school would take it and say no. No, in a way that felt like a punishment. I'm sorry I didn't go to the office first. We're not here to confiscate kindness, Miss Driscoll said, hearing herself and liking it. We just like it to make appointments. She exhaled, and the rigidness left her shoulders like leaves leaving a tree. Let's get them out the side door, so we don't start a zoo in the hallway. Miss Ramirez was already on the phone. Yes, Willow Street? Hi, it's Elena. We have a cold neonate found last night warmed with a hand warmer, eating status unknown. The child who found it is heroic. She listened, nodding, colored pens ready. Yes, I'll tell them. Thank you. She hung up and looked delighted to give good news. They're expecting you at noon, precisely. They have an incubator ready. They said thank you. They said whoever warmed it saved it from hypothermia. They said good job. At that, Lena's tears overflowed in an unembarrassed line. And Miss Hale saw the truth of a promise, that sometimes you can make one at your kitchen table and the world will bend itself to honor it. Rosa kissed the top of her head. The kitten, as if delivering its own approval, purred a fraction louder. I'll write a note for her teacher, Miss Hale said to herself, then remembered she was her own teacher and smiled at the absurdity, and at how many rolls a day asks of a person. I will tell them she stood all morning for a reason. She would also tell them that sometimes standing was what kindness looks like when rules have not yet made room. Thanksgiving is next week, Miss Ramirez noted, glancing at the paper turkey on the bulletin board that had been there so long its tape had a grey halo. Someone had traced it with a child's hand, the fingers painted into feathers, the thumb a stubborn neck. Feels right, she said, to be grateful for a small thing that turned out to be everything. As if on cue, outside the window, the air decided. Snow began, tentative and then more confident, small dry flakes first, then the kind that seemed to float orders to be followed softly. The maple at the fence held out its last leaves like tongues catching blessing. The playground's bright plastic softened under white. In the hall, some children shouted with that pure relief that weather sometimes brings, permission to feel. Miss Driscoll went to the door. I'll keep the hall moving, she said in her born commander voice, now tempered by a very recent lesson. You go when you're ready. She stepped out and disappeared into the corridor's river with a new secret, that she could shepherd and not just corral. Rosa adjusted the pouch, checked the warmer, the red light, a steady heartbeat, and zipped the jacket to the right notch, so the kitten's face could tuck against the scarf and breathe new air gently. "Not one more minute cold," she said to Lena, making the promise a family motto now, a story they would tell in kitchens with warm lights and in rooms with folding chairs after concerts and in lines at the DMVs when patients needed a friend. "We'll go now, we'll go slow. We'll keep the jacket closed when we pass the cafeteria. People get loud when they're hungry." She smiled, a conspirator. Lena returned the smile like a reflection. They were small conspirators in a big world, it would do. Ms. Hale thought of the pile of simile worksheets and the way Devon would make a joke about the kitten being a metaphor for something, and how she would pretend to frown and secretly love him for it. She thought of calling her father later and telling him that the woman who told her to breathe had a daughter who kept a promise to something tiny, and that they'd warmed a life with an old scar. She thought of the way people's lives thread through each other like the reflective strands in safety glass. Crisscrossed, barely visible, entirely what keeps the pain from shattering. In the doorway, the fluorescent building gave them one last test, a hallway full of sound. Sixth graders clattered by, their voices too big for their mouths. A custodian pushed a yellow mop bucket that sloshed like a small sea. Somewhere a teacher sang the planet's song to a tune that pretended science is easy. Rosa tightened her arm around her daughter. Elena tucked her chin, protective. Ms. Hale and Ms. Ramirez flanked them without even planning. Two aunties for the length of a hallway. At the side door, near the construction paper turkey, and a sign-in sheet that always ran out of pens exactly when you needed one, Ms. Driscoll waited with a set of keys. She pushed the crash bar with her hip, an act of mild rebellion, and held it open so the cold could walk in and the little party could walk out. The first flakes touched Lena's hair and dissolved like agreement. The air tasted like pennies and clean linen. From somewhere intangible, a church bell counted noon, low and slow, the sound smudged by falling snow. On the threshold, Miss Hale paused. "Thank you," she said to Rosa, though the reason was larger than the morning. It reached back over 19 winters to a shoulder squeezed and a voice that found the right rhythm for a frightened child's lungs. For that night, she added, just loud enough to be heard over the soft hiss of snow, for this one. Rosa smiled, a smile that made her eyes water in the way of women who have no time for delicate tears, but let them come today. "De nada," she said, which always means more than it translates to. "It's nothing, it's everything." They stepped out. The cold kissed them awake, and Lena lifted her face into the flakes, letting them land and melt and land again. The kitten, hidden against warmth, made a new sound, tiny, hopeful, like the bell in the smallest chapel. It wasn't quite a meow, it was a beginning. Down the front steps they went, moving slow to keep heat gathered. Miss Hale watched them cross the small patch of sidewalk to the car lane, watched Rosa adjust her pace to match her daughter's, watched Lena adjust the jacket so the pouch nestled perfectly, watched the world make space for this tiny procession. A bus at the light flashed its hazard blinkers kindly, giving them the soft of right-of-way. In the distance, the Willow Street sign would be blinking on. Inside, a woman with a clipboard would be heating bottles the size of kindnesses. Behind her, in the nurse's office, Ms. Ramirez taped a new flyer next to the turkey. "Coat drive. Bring warmth." She underlined warmth as if the word could become a door. In room 12, chairs scraped as kids shifted to share their similes. "The snow is like salt on a grey table," Mia would say. "My heart is a drum that's learning a new song," Devon would say. And for once he would not be wrong. Miss Hale wiped her eyes and walked back toward the class, already composing the sentence for the attendance log that would not betray anything important. "Student left early with guardian." All is well. Outside, the flakes found their courage and thickened. The school's bricks softened into a holiday car. A custodian shook salt from a blue bag onto the stairs, and the granules chimed like tiny glass. Somewhere a radio played a song about home, The day turned its face toward kindness the way sunflowers find the sun even in weak November light. And though the morning's first whisper had sounded like trouble, though the bulge under the jacket and the ambiguous whir had asked everyone's nerves to learn a new language, the story folded itself into clarity. It had been a rescue all along, a promise held, a warmth kept. A thread drawn from a roadside night years ago to a nurse's office at noon, stitched through with a scarf that had known necks and now knew paws. A teacher went back to her class. A mother walked with her child. A kitten dreamed toward a bottle and a heat lamp. The hallway puddled with melt. The bulletin boards bristled with paper gratitude. The first snow kept falling, quieting everything that ought to be quiet, brightening everything that ought to be bright.